Hi, everyone. We're glad you're here to watch another story. We wanted to mention something important. Right now, 97% of the people who tune into our channel haven't subscribed. That means a lot of you might be missing out on our latest stories. Subscribing is the easiest way to ensure you get notified whenever we post a new video about infidelity and the twists and turns of life. It's completely free, and it means you'll always be in the loop. Plus, it really supports our channel and helps us continue to find and share these compelling stories. So take a moment now and hit that subscribe button below. You won't regret it. Okay, now to today's story. You know, sometimes life throws you a curveball so hard, you don't even see it coming. And then, before you know it, everything you thought was solid. Well, it just ain't anymore. This is kinda what happened to me. It ain't easy to talk about, but maybe it'll make sense to someone out there. It was the night Anthony left for that business trip to Chicago. Seemed like any other time he went away, you know. Suitcase packed, kiss goodbye at the door, the usual. But this time felt different. The air in the house was thick, heavy, like before a storm, but the sky was clear as a bell. Maybe it was just me being silly, but I felt this kinda emptiness settle in as soon as his car pulled out of the driveway. Like a little piece of me went with him, even though I knew he'd be back in a few days. The first couple of days were quiet. Too quiet, maybe. I tried to keep busy, did some laundry, watched some of them home improvement shows on TV, even attempted to bake a cake, which ended up looking more like a science experiment, huh? But the quiet just kept creeping back in, filling up all the corners of the house. I found myself looking out the window a lot, just watching the world go by. It sounds dumb, I know, but it was like I was waiting for something to happen. And boy, did something happen. It was on the third night, I think. I was just getting ready for bed, brushing my teeth, when I heard a knock at the door. Now, we don't get a lot of visitors late at night, so my heart kinda jumped into my throat. I peeked through the peephole and saw Matthew standing there. Matthew, Anthony's best friend. Now, Matthew's a good guy, always has been. We've known him for years. Him and Anthony were like two peas in a pod since they were kids. But still, it felt a little strange him showing up so late. I opened the door, trying to act like I wasn't all nervous inside. Matthew, everything all right? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked a little awkward, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Hey, Hannah. Yeah, everything's fine, I think. Just wanted to check in on you. Check in on me? I raised an eyebrow. Why? He kinda chuckled, but it sounded a little forced. Well, Anthony asked me to. Said he was a little worried about you being here all alone. Worried? Anthony? He's never really been the worrying type. Usually, he's the one I'm telling to be more careful. It felt a little odd, to be honest. But Matthew seemed sincere enough standing there with this kinda concerned look on his face. Oh, I said, trying to sound casual. Well, that was nice of him. I'm fine, though, really. Just a little bored, maybe. Yeah, well, I figured, Matthew said. Look, I don't want to intrude or nothing, but I was just passing by and thought I'd see if you needed anything. Groceries? Anything broken around the house? It was a little strange, him being so attentive. But then again, maybe he was just being a good friend. Anthony would do the same for his wife, if Matthew had one. No, I'm good on all that, Matthew. But thanks for checking. He lingered for a moment, like he had something else to say. Well, all right then. You take care, Hannah. And if you need anything at all, you just call me, okay? Day or night? I will, I said, and gave him a little smile. He smiled back, a real genuine one this time, and then turned and headed back to his car. I watched him go, a strange mix of relief and something else, swirling around inside me. It was awkward, sure, but there was something about him being there, caring enough to check on me, that kinda warmed me a little in that empty house. It was the start of something I didn't see coming at all. And honestly, maybe deep down, It was something I'd been missing for a long time. Matthew started stopping by more often after that first night. Not every night, mind you, but maybe every other day or so. He'd usually come in the late afternoon, after he finished work at the garage. Sometimes he'd bring over a pizza from that place down on Main Street, saying he didn't feel like cooking after a long day of wrenching on engines and thought I might not either. Those pizzas always smelled so good, that mix of pepperoni and something kind of spicy. Other times he'd just pop in for a quick cup of coffee. I'd usually have a pot brewing anyway, the quiet house making me drink more coffee than usual. We'd sit at the kitchen table, the sun slanting in through the window, making dust motes dance in the air, and just chat. At first, it still felt a little weird, like I was doing something I shouldn't. I kept thinking, what would Anthony say if he could see this? The thought would give me this little twist in my stomach, a flash of guilt. But Matthew was always so easy to talk to, so down to earth. He never made me feel uncomfortable, even though I knew the situation was a little strange. He had this way of listening, really listening, when you talked. He'd lean forward, looking right at you, and nod like he was really taking in every word. He'd ask questions, not just to be polite, but because he genuinely seemed interested in what I had to say. We'd talk about all sorts of things, the crazy weather we'd been having, the funny things the neighbors were up to, silly stuff we saw on TV. He even got me laughing a few times. It felt good, that sound in the quiet house, like a little bit of sunshine peeking through the clouds. One afternoon, he came over and found me trying to fix a leaky faucet in the kitchen. The steady drip, drip, drip had been driving me nuts for days. I was under the sink, surrounded by a jumble of rusty wrenches and pipes that all looked the same to me, looking more confused than a hound dog trying to understand algebra. The air under there was damp and smelled a little moldy. Matthew just chuckled when he saw my predicament and said, "Here, let me take a look at that." He knelt down beside me, his presence making that small space feel a little less claustrophobic. And, sure enough, with a few twists and turns of the right wrench, he had it fixed in no time. He was always handy like that. Anthony was more of a call a professional kind of guy. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it was nice to have someone around who could actually fix things, someone who didn't mind getting his hands a little dirty. As the days went by, I started looking forward to Matthew's visits. That heavy, empty feeling in the house would kinda lift when he was there. The silence felt less oppressive, replaced by the sound of our voices, sometimes laughing, sometimes just talking quietly. We'd sit in the living room, the afternoon sun, warm on our faces, sometimes just talking about nothing in particular, sometimes watching an old movie on TV. There was this comfortable silence between us too, a kind of understanding that didn't need words. It was something I hadn't really felt with anyone except maybe my own sister, Sarah, years ago. One evening, we were watching an old black and white movie, something silly and romantic with Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn. I was sitting on the couch, the worn springs sagging a little under me, and Matthew was in the armchair across from me, the one Anthony always used to sit in. At one point, I looked over at him, and he was already looking at me. The light from the TV flickered across his face, and there was this look in his eyes. It wasn't just friendly. It was something softer, more intense. My heart kinda did a little flutter, like a trapped bird trying to escape its cage. I quickly looked back at the TV, feeling my cheeks get a little warm and hoping he hadn't noticed. The air in the room suddenly felt a little thicker, charged with something I couldn't quite name. It happened again a few times after that. A look that lingered a little too long, a touch on the arm when he was handing me the remote, a little extra squeeze in his hug when he said goodbye at the door, the porch light casting long shadows behind him. Nothing big, nothing you could really point to and say, "Aha, that's it." But it was there, this connection, a spark, and honestly, it felt good, like a little seed starting to sprout in dry ground. It felt like something I'd been missing for a long, long time in my life with Anthony. We'd been together since we were kids ourselves, practically, and sometimes it felt like we were more like comfortable roommates than anything else. The spark had kinda dimmed over the years, and here it was again, unexpectedly, with Anthony's best friend. It was confusing, exciting, and yeah, a little scary too. I knew in my head it wasn't right, not really. Anthony was my husband, the man I'd promised to spend my life with. But my heart was starting to feel things I hadn't felt in years, and how I felt was drawn to Matthew, like a moth to a flame, even though a little voice in the back of my head kept whispering that I might get burned. The guilt started creeping in around that time. It was like this little voice in the back of my head, always whispering, "You shouldn't be feeling this way. Anthony's your husband. This is wrong." And it was right, of course. It was wrong. But try telling your heart that when it's starting to beat a little faster every time Matthew walks into the room. I tried to ignore it, tried to just enjoy the friendship, the company. But it was getting harder and harder. There was this tension building up between Matthew and me, this unspoken thing hanging in the air whenever we were together. I could see it in his eyes, too. That same mix of wanting and hesitation. One rainy afternoon, Anthony was supposed to come home the next day. Matthew came over. The rain was coming down in sheets, thunder was rumbling in the distance, and the house felt cozy and warm with the lights on. We were sitting on the couch watching the rain race down the window panes. The silence felt different that day. It wasn't the comfortable silence we'd had before. It was charged, heavy with unsaid words. Finally, Matthew turned to me. His eyes were serious, his brow slightly furrowed. "Hannah," he said, his voice low, "there's something I need to tell you." My heart started pounding in my chest. I knew what was coming. I'd felt it building for weeks. I just nodded, unable to speak. He took a deep breath like he was trying to find the right words. I think I'm falling for you, Hannah." There. He said it. The words hung in the air between us, thick and real. I didn't say anything. What could I say? I knew I felt something for him too, but saying it out loud felt like crossing a line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "I know this is wrong," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "Anthony's my best friend. But I can't help how I feel, and I think you feel it too." Tears welled up in my eyes. It was true. I did feel it, but admitting it felt like a betrayal. "Matthew," I finally managed to say, my voice shaky. I don't know what to say." He reached out and gently took my hand. His hand was warm and calloused, and it felt right in mine. "You don't have to say anything right now. Just know that I care about you, Hannah. A lot." We sat there for a long time, just holding hands, the only sound the rain beating against the windows. It felt like the world outside had disappeared, and it was just the two of us, caught in this little bubble of unspoken feelings. That night, I didn't sleep much. My mind was racing. Anthony was coming home tomorrow. What was I gonna do? I couldn't just pretend like nothing had happened. I couldn't go back to the way things were before Matthew came into my life. I knew I had to tell Anthony. It wouldn't be easy. It would probably hurt him, maybe even end our marriage. But I couldn't live a lie anymore. I owed him the truth, and I owed it to myself too. I knew, deep down, that my feelings for Matthew were real, and I couldn't just ignore them. It was time for a change, a big one, and it scared me half to death, but I knew it was the right thing to do. The next day, when Anthony's plane was supposed to land in the early afternoon, I was a nervous wreck. My stomach felt all twisted up in knots. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing counters and vacuuming rugs like my life depended on it, trying to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't just spin in circles of worry. What would he say? How would he react when I told him? Would he be angry, yelling and screaming? Or would he just be quiet and hurt, which might be even worse? I didn't know. All I knew was that I had to be honest with him, no matter how hard it was. The silence in the house felt different now, not just empty, but heavy with what I knew I had to say. He finally arrived home in the late afternoon, looking tired but with that familiar smile on his face when he saw me. He dropped his suitcase by the door with a thud and gave me a hug and a kiss that felt different somehow, like there was a little distance there already. For a moment, everything felt almost normal, like he'd just been away for a few days and was glad to be back. But that feeling was fleeting. I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. The truth was like a stone in my gut, and I had to get it out. We were sitting in the living room after a quiet dinner. Neither of us had much appetite. Anthony was telling me about his business trip, something about meetings and presentations, but his words were just washing over me. My heart was pounding in my chest like a drum, and my palms felt all sweaty and clammy. The air in the room felt thick, like you could cut it with a knife. Finally, I took a deep breath, the air catching a little in my throat, and interrupted him mid-sentence. "Anthony," I said, my voice trembling slightly, sounding small and scared even to my own ears. "There's something I need to tell you, something important." He looked at me, a little surprised, his eyebrows furrowing slightly. "What is it, honey? You seem off." I took another deep breath, trying to find the right words, but they all felt inadequate. So I just blurted it out, like ripping off a bandage. "While you were gone, Matthew's been coming over, and we've developed feelings for each other." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. The look on his face was like someone had just punched him in the stomach. His smile vanished. His eyes widened in disbelief, like he couldn't quite process what I just said. "What?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, like he was afraid to even say the words out loud. "Matthew? Your Matthew? My Matthew?" I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes, blurring my vision. "It just happened. I know it's wrong, Anthony. I know it is. But I can't deny how I feel. And he feels the same way." He stared at me for a long moment, his face pale and drawn, like all the color had drained out of it. Then he stood up abruptly and started pacing back and forth across the worn rug in the living room, his hands running through his hair. "I don't understand," he said, his voice rising with each step, tinged with disbelief and anger. "Matthew? My best friend since we were kids? The guy I trusted more than anyone? And you? My wife? The woman I love?" His voice cracked on the last word. "I know, Anthony," I said, my voice choked with tears. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It just did." The guilt was a heavy weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. He stopped pacing and turned to face me. His eyes filled with a pain I'd never seen before. It was like a knife twisting in my gut. Did anything happen?" he asked, his voice tight and strained, like he was afraid of the answer. I hesitated for a moment, looking down at my hands, unable to meet his gaze. Then I nodded slowly. "Yes," I whispered, the word barely audible. We kissed. More than once." He ran a hand roughly through his hair again, his face etched with anguish. He looked around the living room, like he was seeing it for the first time, or maybe like he was looking for answers in the familiar furniture. I don't know what to say," he said, his voice thick with emotion, like he was trying not to cry. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the soft sound of my sobs. We sat there for a long time, the only sound, the steady ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway, each tick seeming to emphasize the enormity of what I'd just confessed. Finally, Anthony spoke again, his voice quieter now, almost resigned. "You know," he said, his gaze distant, like he was looking back on our life together. I kinda sensed something was different when I talked to you on the phone this week. You seemed distant, preoccupied, but I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself it was just the bad connection, or that you were tired." He looked at me then, his eyes sad but not filled with the rage I'd expected. I guess we haven't been truly happy for a while now, have we, Hannah?" I shook my head, tears streaming down my face, making my vision blurry. "No, Anthony," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Not really. Not for a long time." We talked for hours that night, the conversation flowing between accusations, apologies, and a shared sadness for what we were losing. We talked about how we'd grown apart over the years, how the spark had faded, how we'd become more like comfortable companions than passionate lovers. It was a painful conversation, the hardest I'd ever had, but it was also honest, brutally so. And in a strange way, amidst all the hurt, it felt like a relief to finally say everything out loud, to lay all our unspoken feelings bare. By the end of the night, after what felt like an eternity of tears and difficult truths, Anthony had made a decision. He said he needed some time, some space to process everything. He said he was going to stay at a hotel downtown for a few days to try and clear his head. And then, he said, his voice heavy with finality, he thought it would be best if he moved out permanently. It was the hardest thing I'd ever heard. Watching him pack a small bag, his movements slow and deliberate, felt like watching our life together being packed away piece by piece. When he finally walked out the door, the silence that followed was deafening. I stood there in the middle of the living room, the tears still falling, feeling a strange mix of overwhelming sadness and a fragile, hesitant sense of hope. Hope for a new beginning, even though it was a terrifying and uncertain one. Life, after Anthony left, was different. It was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. It wasn't lonely. It was more like peaceful. And a little bit scary, too. Matthew and I started spending more time together, openly this time. We went for walks in the park, had dinners at each other's places, just did normal couple things. It felt strange at first calling him my boyfriend, holding his hand in public. But it also felt right. We talked a lot about Anthony, about how much he meant to both of us. It wasn't easy, but we knew we had to be honest with each other, just like I'd tried to be with Anthony. Matthew felt guilty, of course. He'd lost his best friend. But Anthony, surprisingly, wasn't angry. He was hurt, yeah, but he understood. He even told Matthew that he just wanted me to be happy. That took a huge weight off both our shoulders. It wasn't all sunshine and roses, though. There were still tough days, days when I missed Anthony, days when Matthew felt the absence of his friend. We had to navigate a lot of complex emotions, a lot of guilt and uncertainty, but we had each other, and that made all the difference. One evening, we were sitting on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Matthew took my hand in his fingers intertwined with mine. We sat there in comfortable silence, just enjoying the moment. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought this would happen." I smiled and leaned my head on his shoulder. "Me neither," I said. "Life's funny like that, ain't it? You never know what's around the corner." He squeezed my hand. "Yeah," he said. "But you know what? I'm glad it did." I looked up at him, and he was looking down at me, his eyes full of warmth and affection. "Me too," I whispered. As we sat there, Watching the last rays of sun disappear below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. It had been a difficult journey, full of unexpected twists and turns, but we'd made it through. And as I held Matthew's hand, looking out at the promise of a new day, I felt a flicker of hope for the future. A future I never would have imagined, but one that felt right. It wasn't the way I thought my life would go, not at all. But sometimes, the unexpected paths lead you to the places you were meant to be all along. Time went by, as it always does, whether you're ready for it or not. The seasons changed a few times. We saw the leaves turn all sorts of pretty colors in the fall. Then the snow came and made everything look quiet and peaceful. Spring brought new life, and then summer with its long, warm days. Through it all, Matthew and I, we stuck together. It wasn't always easy, mind you. There were still days when I thought about Anthony. Not in a way that made me want to go back, but more like remembering a chapter of my life that was now closed. We'd had a lot of good years together, Anthony and me, and it felt a little sad sometimes, thinking about all that history. But then Matthew would do something silly, or say something sweet, and I'd remember why things had changed. Matthew and Anthony, they didn't really talk much at first. It was awkward, you can imagine. But slowly, over time, they started to mend things. Not back to how they were before, maybe that was never going to happen, but they found a way to be civil, to respect each other. It wasn't easy for either of them, I know that. But they did it. For me, and for themselves, I think. Matthew and I, we built a new life together. It wasn't the life I ever pictured for myself, not in a million years. But it was a good life, a comfortable life. We bought a little place by the lake, something we could fix up together. Matthew was always good with his hands, and I learned a thing or two along the way, too. We spent our weekends fishing and just enjoying the quiet. It was a far cry from the busy life Anthony and I used to have, but it suited me. It suited us. Sometimes I'd look at Matthew, sitting across from me at the dinner table or holding my hand while we watched the sunset over the lake, and I'd think about that first night he came to check on me. I never would have guessed that one little knock on the door would change everything, that it would lead me down this unexpected path, away from the life I knew and towards something new and, well, better, in a way. It wasn't just about finding someone new, though. It was about finding myself again, too. For a long time, I felt like I was just going through the motions, like a character in someone else's story. But with Matthew, it felt different. He saw me, really saw me for who I was, and he loved me, flaws and all. And I loved him right back. Learned a lot through all of this. I learned that life ain't always predictable, that sometimes the things you least expect are the things that change you the most. I learned that it's okay to let go of the past, even if it's scary, and most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to find happiness, even when you think you've lost your way. So, yeah, that's my story. It ain't a fairy tale, and it wasn't always easy. There were tears and heartache and a whole lot of confusion along the way. But in the end, I found something real, something that makes me happy. And that, I reckon, is all that matters in the end. We're still by that lake, Matthew and me. Sometimes, Anthony even comes to visit. We sit on the porch, the three of us, and talk about old times and new times. It ain't perfect, but it's our life. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. The sun's setting now, just like it did that night on the porch swing. And Matthew's reaching for my hand. So, I guess that's my cue. Thanks for listening. It wasn't easy to tell, but I hope it made some kind of sense. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any cheating wife story.